After 6 years of transforming my father's struggling electronics shop into a $45 million smart home powerhouse, I heard the words that shattered my world. At our annual executive summit, my father stood up, placed his hand on my brother Tom's shoulder, and announced with a confident smile, "Thomas will be taking over as CEO next month." My stomach plummeted, but years of negotiating with tech giants had taught me to maintain a neutral expression. I smiled graciously and raised my champagne flute in a toast while my mind raced with one thought. This isn't over. Everything I've built won't be dismantled that easily. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The elegant ballroom of the Grand Summit Hotel was transformed that evening. Ambient lighting bathed the room in a soft blue glow, matching our company colors. Interactive product displays showcased our latest innovations along the perimeter, innovations I had conceptualized and brought to market. Crystal centerpieces on each table contained embedded LEDs that synchronized with the presentation slides, my idea for demonstrating our miniaturized smart lighting technology to the investors and partners in attendance. Harrington Electronics 40th Anniversary Celebration, which I had meticulously planned to highlight our unprecedented growth and technological transformation, had in an instant become the stage for my public demotion. My father, Richard Harrington, stood tall in his custom charcoal suit, silver-streaked hair perfectly styled, exuding the unwavering confidence of a man who had never second-guessed a decision in his life. Beside him, my brother Tom barely concealed the smug satisfaction in his eyes, his practiced humble nod contradicted by the victorious glint I knew all too well from childhood competitions. And me, Samantha Harrington, wearing the tailored Navy power suit I'd chosen specifically because it commanded respect in an industry dominated by men, now feeling like I was dressed in paper rather than premium wool. The emerald pendant my grandfather had given me when I graduated from MIT felt suddenly heavy against my collarbone. To Harrington Electronics' bright future, my father continued, and to a seamless transition of leadership into the next generation. The room erupted in applause, champagne glasses clinking, congratulations directed at Tom. I could feel sympathetic glances thrown my way, burning like tiny lasers against my skin. 6 years of my life, 6 years of 80-hour weeks, canceled vacations, relationships sacrificed on the altar of Harrington Electronics. 6 years of transforming a regional component supplier on the verge of bankruptcy into a cutting-edge smart home technology company with clients worldwide and partnerships with 3 major tech platforms. And this was my reward. Throughout the evening, I maintained my composure, accepting what sounded increasingly like condolences disguised as congratulations with practiced grace. "You've done remarkable work, Sam. The company wouldn't be where it is without your vision," whispered Jeffrey Palmer, our largest investor, squeezing my shoulder. "I'm sure you'll find an exciting new venture to revolutionize," offered Angela Torres, our marketing director, her expression pained. Each well-meaning comment twisted the knife deeper. I excused myself as soon as I could, claiming an early meeting with our overseas suppliers. In truth, I couldn't bear another minute watching Tom accept accolades for a success he had no part in building. The drive home through downtown Denver should have calmed me. The city skyline against the mountain backdrop usually filled me with a sense of accomplishment. My grandfather had started with a tiny electronics repair shop, and now our company logo illuminated the side of a 12-story building in the tech district. Tonight, I barely registered the view. My penthouse apartment felt sterile and empty as I kicked off my heels and poured 3 fingers of the 25-year-old whiskey I'd been saving for our 50% market share milestone. This wasn't the celebration I'd imagined, but it seemed fitting nonetheless. I stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city lights, the same view I'd promised myself during my first year at Harrington Electronics, when I was working from a converted storage closet because my father refused to renovate the crumbling offices. To clarity, I whispered to myself, the expensive whiskey burning a path down my throat. I hadn't cried when I graduated top of my engineering class, and my father asked why I wasn't valedictorian. I hadn't cried when I declined a position at Google to join the family business, only to be assigned to the failing components division that everyone had written off as obsolete. I hadn't cried when my fiancé left because, in his words, "You're married to that company, Sam, not me." And I wouldn't cry now. Instead, I did what I always did when faced with a seemingly insurmountable problem. I analyzed it systematically. I opened my laptop and pulled up the company files. Harrington Electronics had been worth approximately $7 million when I joined, a far cry from its peak in the 90s, but still operational. The first year had been about stopping the hemorrhaging, cutting outdated product lines, modernizing our inventory management system, renegotiating supplier contracts. The second year, I'd focused on stabilizing our core business while identifying growth opportunities. By year 3, I'd developed our pivot strategy, transforming from component supplier to smart home technology innovator. My father had resisted, vehemently. "We make electronic components, Samantha, circuit boards and power supplies. We always have," he'd argued, his face reddening as I presented market projections. But the numbers couldn't be dismissed, and I'd eventually worn him down. The transition had been grueling, retraining our engineering team, developing proprietary software, building relationships with tech platforms, creating an entirely new brand identity. I'd worked 80-hour weeks, sleeping on the office couch more nights than I could count, and it had succeeded beyond anyone's expectations. Our first integrated smart home security system had won innovation awards and led to contracts with major home builders. Revenue had increased steadily, reaching $45 million this quarter with projections to hit $60 million by year-end. Our profit margins had tripled, all of which made tonight's announcement even more baffling. Tom knew nothing about product development cycles or supply chain management. He had never led an engineering team, navigated FCC approval processes, or structured a partnership agreement with a tech giant. Placing him at the helm wasn't just an insult to me. It was potentially catastrophic for the company itself. I scrolled through financial reports, board meeting minutes, ownership structures. My father still held 51% of the company shares, which gave him the authority to appoint the CEO. I owned 19%, gradually acquired through performance bonuses over the years. My brother owned 5%, gifted on his 30th birthday. Various minor investors, mostly family friends and early supporters, held the remaining 25%. Most would follow my father's lead without question. The ownership structure confirmed what I already knew. My father had the legal right to make this decision, regardless of how misguided it might be. I closed the laptop and walked to my home office, a space decorated with the artifacts of my success: industry innovation awards, framed patents, the prototype of our first smart home hub that had changed everything. My gaze settled on a particular photograph. Me at 9 years old sitting on my grandfather's lap in his workshop, both of us tinkering with a circuit board, identical expressions of concentration on our faces. "My little engineer," he used to call me. Grandpa James had recognized my aptitude for technology early, spending hours teaching me about electronics when my friends were playing with dolls. He'd been the one to encourage my engineering degree despite my father's insistence that marketing would be more suitable for a young lady. "This company will need your mind someday, Sammy," my grandfather had told me shortly before he passed away. "Promise me you'll be ready when that day comes." What would he think of tonight's announcement? Of the company he built from nothing, being handed to someone who had shown no interest in electronics until the balance sheet improved? As the city lights twinkled below, a clarity began to form in my mind. This wasn't just about me or my wounded pride. This was about the 180 employees who depended on Harrington Electronics for their livelihoods, about the suppliers whose businesses were intertwined with ours. about my grandfather's legacy and the future of smart home technology we were pioneering. I hadn't fought this hard, for this long, to watch it all unravel because of outdated notions about succession. By the time dawn broke over the mountains, casting long shadows across my apartment, I had made my decision. I wouldn't resign in protest. I wouldn't start over somewhere else. I would fight. And unlike my father and brother, I had come prepared for battle. The morning after the announcement, I arrived at Harrington Electronics headquarters at 6:15. Just as I had nearly every day for the past 6 years. The modern glass building with its distinctive blue-tinted windows, another of my initiatives, replacing the cramped offices above my grandfather's original shop, reflected the early morning sunlight. Preparing and sharing this story took a tremendous amount of effort, so if you're finding it valuable, please subscribe to our channel. It truly means so much to us. Now, let's get back to what happened next. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I greeted the security guard, who looked surprised to see me. "Morning, Ms. Harrington. Thought you might take the day off after last night's big news." "The technology doesn't develop itself, Dave," I replied with a smile that didn't reach. Our partners in Seoul are waiting for feedback on the new interface design. The elevator ride to the executive floor gave me precious moments to compose myself, to suppress the anger that threatened to surface each time I replayed last night's events. When the doors opened, I was surprised to find Jessica Chen, our COO, already at her desk, surrounded by spreadsheets and market reports. "Samantha," she said, looking up with concern etched across her features. Jessica had been my first significant hire, recruited from a major tech company with the promise of building something revolutionary together. She had been my right hand through every phase of our transformation. "I tried calling you last night. Are you okay?" "I'm fine," I said automatically, the response so practiced it required no thought. "Just caught off guard like everyone else." Jessica followed me into my office, still my office, at least for the next month, and closed the door behind her. "This is complete bullshit, and you know it. What the hell is Richard thinking?" I set my bag down carefully, arranging it precisely on the credenza. "Apparently, he's thinking it's time for the prodigal son to return and claim his birthright. Tom knows nothing about this business. Nothing." Jessica ran a hand through her short black hair, her frustration evident. "The Samsung partnership alone requires someone who understands both the technical specifications and the strategic implications. Not to mention the cloud infrastructure transition we're planning for Q3. All valid points that I'm sure my father considered deeply before making his decision," I replied, my tone so dry it could have evaporated the morning dew outside. Jessica stared at me. "How are you so calm right now? If it were me, what would you have me do? Throw things? Scream? Resign in a blaze of righteous indignation?" I turned to the window, looking out at the mountains in the distance, their peaks still snow-capped even in June. None of those options serve my interests, or the company's. "So you're just going to accept this?" The disappointment in her voice stung more than I cared to admit. I turned back to her, letting her see a glimpse of the determination I'd been masking. "I said none of those options serve my interests. I didn't say I was accepting anything." A small smile crossed her face. "There she is. I was worried for a minute." "Give me time. I'm working on something." I glanced at my watch. "Don't we have the quarterly product roadmap review at 9? Jessica nodded, recognizing my signal, that the personal conversation was over. "I'll have the updated projections ready." After she left, I allowed myself one moment, just one, of pure, unadulterated emotion. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath, feeling the rage and hurt and disappointment coursing through me like electricity. Then, like closing a circuit breaker, I shut it down. Compartmentalized emotions were a luxury I couldn't afford right now. My phone buzzed with a text from Tom. "Hope there are no hard feelings, sis. Dad says you'll stay on to help with the transition. Lunch today to discuss? The new Italian place on 17th? No hard feelings. As if this were a minor disagreement over the last slice of pizza, not the culmination of my life's work being handed to someone who'd shown up yesterday." I didn't respond. Instead, I pulled up the confidential file I'd started compiling at 3 a.m. Project Phoenix, I'd named it, appropriate for what I had in mind. By 8:30, messages had begun flooding in. Partners concerned about the leadership, change, employees seeking reassurance, industry contacts expressing surprise. I responded to each with the same measured professionalism. Change was natural in any organization. Tom brought fresh perspectives. I remained committed to our company's success. The platitudes tasted like ash, but the alternative, admitting I'd been blindsided and demoted, was unthinkable. At 8:45, my assistant Katie knocked tentatively on my door. "Your father would like to see you before the product roadmap review." Of course he would. I straightened my blazer, checked my reflection in my phone screen, and made the short walk to the corner office that had been my grandfather's, then my father's, and would soon be Tom's. Richard Harrington sat behind his massive mahogany desk, reviewing quarterly reports with reading glasses perched on the end of his nose. He looked up as I entered, his expression unreadable. At 65, he still cut an imposing figure, over 6 feet tall with the build of the college football player he once was, silver hair his only concession to age. "Samantha, good, you're here." He gestured to the chair across from him. "I thought we should discuss the transition plan." I sat, crossing my legs and folding my hands in my lap. Poised, professional, giving nothing away. "What would you like to discuss?" "Thomas will need your help getting up to speed on the technical aspects of the business. I've told him you'll stay on through the end of the quarter to ensure continuity." Not a request, a statement, as if my continued employment was a foregone conclusion. As if I had no choice but to facilitate my own replacement. "I see," I said, my voice neutral. "And what role do you envision for me after the transition period?" My father looked momentarily uncomfortable, the first crack in his authoritative facade. "Well, that's something we should discuss. Perhaps the components division? You did well with it initially." The components division. A small side operation with annual revenue of perhaps $3 million. A fraction of our smart home technology business. A demotion so severe it might as well come with a cubicle and a dented filing cabinet. "I appreciate your concern for my career path," I said carefully. "But before we discuss that, I'd like to understand the rationale behind yesterday's announcement. What made this the right time for Tom to step into the CEO role?" My father removed his reading glasses, a sure sign he was preparing to deliver what he considered irrefutable wisdom. "Samantha, Harrington Electronics has always been meant to pass from father to son. It's tradition. Your grandfather passed it to me, and now it's Thomas's turn. Even though I've been running it successfully for nearly 6 years, you've done exceptional work," he conceded, as if granting a great favor. "And that won't be forgotten. But Thomas is a Harrington man. The company bears his name. It's his birthright." His birthright. As if I, with the same Harrington blood running through my veins, somehow had a weaker claim because I'd been born female. "I understand," I said, rising from my chair. And I did understand. Far better than my father realized. I understood exactly what I was dealing with and exactly what I needed to do about it. "The product roadmap review starts in 5 minutes. Shall we head to the conference room?" My father nodded, apparently relieved that I was taking the news so well. Poor, predictable Samantha. Always reasonable. Always accommodating. Little did he know that beneath my calm exterior, a storm was brewing. One that would soon engulf everything. He thought he knew about his company and his children. The product roadmap review began exactly on time, as all meetings at Harrington Electronics had since I'd implemented the efficiency protocols 3 years ago. The executive conference room, with its 20-foot glass wall overlooking the R&D lab below, was my favorite space in the building. I'd designed it specifically so executives would always have a visual reminder of the innovation happening in real time. Today, all 10 seats around the table were filled: department heads, division directors, and our chief officers. Many exchanged uncomfortable glances as my father and I entered. News traveled fast, and everyone had questions no one dared to ask. As I took my usual seat to my father's right, I noticed a new addition to our meeting. Tom slouched in a chair at the far end, scrolling through his phone, dressed in what passed for business attire in his mind: designer jeans, an untucked button-down, and loafers without socks. At 35, 3 years my junior, he still carried himself with the casual indifference of someone who had never needed to prove his worth. "Before we begin," my father announced, "I want to formally welcome Thomas to the executive team. As I announced last night, he'll be taking over as CEO next month and will be shadowing Samantha through the transition period." Murmurs of half-hearted "Congratulations" filled the room. Tom raised a hand in acknowledgement, his eyes never leaving his phone. I launched into the quarterly review without missing a beat, walking through product development timelines, technology integration metrics, and financial projections with the precision of someone who knew every number by heart, because I did. Our smart home division was tracking 23% ahead of projections. Our new AI-powered security system had reduced false alarms by 87%. Customer retention was at an all-time high of 94%. And looking ahead to Q3, I continued, bringing up a slide showing our pipeline, we have the final certification review for the Samsung integration next week, which should clear the way for the partnership expansion we've been discussing. What's the bottom line here? Tom interrupted, speaking for the first time. These numbers are impressive and all, but what's our actual profit margin on the smart home systems versus the traditional components? I paused, surprised not by the question but by Tom's apparent interest. Our overall margin is 32%, up from 24% this time last year. The smart home division specifically is running at 38%, while components remain at about 22%. Tom nodded, making a note on his phone. And what's industry standard for similar technology? 20 to 25% is considered excellent, Jessica answered, shooting me a look. We're significantly outperforming the sector. Good, Tom said, as if he'd just confirmed something he already knew rather than learning it for the first time. The meeting continued with updates from each department. Throughout, I noticed a subtle shift in dynamics I hadn't anticipated. People were addressing their comments to Tom, seeking his reaction, explaining terms they wouldn't normally define. They were already adapting to the new power structure, positioning themselves favorably with the incoming CEO. Human nature, I supposed. Self-preservation. I couldn't blame them. As the meeting concluded, my father stood. Excellent work, everyone. Samantha, can you walk Thomas through the Samsung certification process this afternoon? He should understand the details before next week's review. Of course, I replied, gathering my materials. Tom, shall we say 2 p.m. in my office? Tom finally looked up from his phone. Actually, I was thinking we could discuss it over lunch. The new place on 17th, Valentino's. I've got us a table at noon. Valentino's, the trendy new restaurant with a 3-month waiting list, where tech executives and venture capitalists conducted business over $200 bottles of wine. Of course, Tom had a table. That works, I said, though I'd been planning to use lunch to call 2 key development partners and reassure them about the transition. As the room emptied, I felt a presence beside me. Robert Martinez, our head of product development and one of my most valued team members, lingered until we were alone. Got a minute? he asked quietly. I nodded, and we stepped into a small meeting room adjacent to the conference area. Is this really happening? Robert asked once the door closed. Tom is CEO? The guy who asked me last week if we could just use Chinese chips in our security systems because they're cheaper? I appreciated Robert's candor. In an industry dominated by careful corporate speak, his bluntness was refreshing. It's happening. You built this company, Samantha. Everyone knows it. The smart home pivot was your vision when the rest of us, including your father, thought it was too risky. Robert leaned against the wall, arms crossed. I've worked at 8 tech companies in my career. I've never seen a leadership change this illogical. Nepotism rarely follows logic, I said, allowing a hint of bitterness to creep into my voice. What are you going to do? It was the same question Jessica had asked earlier, but coming from Robert, who had contacts throughout the tech world, it carried different implications. Right now, I'm going to ensure a smooth transition, I replied. Beyond that, I'm exploring options. Robert nodded slowly. Just so you know, if those options include starting fresh somewhere else, you wouldn't be going alone. Half the development team would follow you without a second thought. The loyalty warmed me, even as it complicated my calculations. I appreciate that, Robert, really. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. He tapped the door frame twice as he left, his signature gesture, part superstition and part habit from his days in military intelligence before entering the tech sector. Just putting it out there. We're with you, whatever comes next. My phone buzzed with a text from Tom. Hope there are no hard feelings, sis. Dad says you'll stay on to help with the transition. Lunch today to discuss? The new Italian place? On 17th? No hard feelings. As if this were a minor disagreement over the last slice of pizza, not the culmination of my life's work being handed to someone who'd shown up yesterday. I didn't respond. Instead, I pulled up the confidential file. I'd started compiling at 3 a.m. Project Phoenix, I'd named it. Appropriate for what I had in mind. By 8:30, messages had begun flooding in. Partners concerned about the leadership change, employees seeking reassurance, industry contacts expressing surprise. I responded to each with the same measured professionalism. Change was natural in any organization. Tom brought fresh perspectives. I remained committed to our company's success. The platitudes tasted like ash, but the alternative, admitting I'd been blindsided and demoted, was unthinkable. At 8:45, my assistant Katie knocked tentatively on my door. Your father would like to see you before the product roadmap review. Of course he would. I straightened my blazer, checked my reflection in my phone screen, and made the short walk to the corner office that had been my grandfather's, then my father's, and would soon be Tom's. Richard Harrington sat behind his massive mahogany desk, reviewing quarterly reports with reading glasses perched on the end of his nose. He looked up as I entered, his expression unreadable. At 65, he still cut an imposing figure, over 6 feet tall with the build of the college football player he once was, silver hair his only concession to age. Samantha, good, you're here. He gestured to the chair across from him. I thought we should discuss the transition plan. I sat, crossing my legs and folding my hands in my lap, poised, professional, giving nothing away. What would you like to discuss? Thomas will need your help getting up to speed on the technical aspects of the business. I've told him you'll stay on through the end of the quarter to ensure continuity. Not a request, a statement. As if my continued employment was a foregone conclusion. As if I had no choice but to facilitate my own replacement. I see, I said, my voice neutral. And what role do you envision for me after the transition period? My father looked momentarily uncomfortable, the first crack in his authoritative facade. Well, that's something we should discuss. Perhaps the components division? You did well with it initially. The components division. a small side operation with annual revenue of perhaps $3 million, a fraction of our smart home technology. Business. A demotion so severe it might as well come with a cubicle and a dented filing cabinet. I appreciate your concern for my career path, I said carefully. But before we discuss that, I'd like to understand the rationale behind yesterday's announcement. What made this the right time for Tom to step into the CEO role? My father removed his reading glasses, a sure sign he was preparing to deliver what he considered irrefutable wisdom. Samantha, Harrington Electronics has always been meant to pass from father to son. It's tradition. Your grandfather passed it to me, and now it's Thomas's turn. Even though I've been running it successfully for nearly 6 years, you've done exceptional work, he conceded, as if granting a great favor. And that won't be forgotten. But Thomas is a Harrington man. The company bears his name. It's his birthright. His birthright. As if I, with the same Harrington blood running through my veins, somehow had a weaker claim because I'd been born female. I understand, I said, rising from my chair. And I did understand. Far better than my father realized. I understood exactly what I was dealing with, and exactly what I needed to do about it. The product roadmap review starts in 5 minutes. Shall we head to the conference room? My father nodded, apparently relieved that I was taking the news so well. Poor, predictable Samantha. Always reasonable, always accommodating. Little did he know that beneath my calm exterior, a storm was brewing. One that would soon engulf everything he thought he knew about his company and his children. The product roadmap review began exactly on time, as all meetings at Harrington Electronics had since I'd implemented the efficiency protocols 3 years ago. The executive conference room, with its 20-foot glass wall overlooking the R&D lab below, was my favorite space in the building. I'd designed it specifically so executives would always have a visual reminder of the innovation happening in real time. Today, all 10 seats around the table were filled: department heads, division directors, and our chief officers. Many exchanged uncomfortable glances as my father and I entered. News traveled fast, and everyone had questions no one dared to ask. As I took my usual seat to my father's right, I noticed a new addition to our meeting. Tom slouched in a chair at the far end, scrolling through his phone, dressed in what passed for business attire in his mind: designer jeans, an untucked button-down, and loafers without socks. At 35, 3 years my junior, he still carried himself, with the casual indifference of someone who had never needed to prove his worth. Before we begin, my father announced, I want to formally welcome Thomas to the executive team. As I announced last night, he'll be taking over as CEO next month and will be shadowing Samantha through the transition period. Murmurs of half-hearted congratulations filled the room. Tom raised a hand in acknowledgement, his eyes never leaving his phone. I launched into the quarterly review without missing a beat, walking through product development timelines, technology integration metrics, and financial projections with the precision of someone who knew every number by heart, because I did. Our smart home division was tracking 23% ahead of projections. Our new AI-powered security system had reduced false alarms by 87%. Customer retention was at an all-time high of 94%. And looking ahead to Q3, I continued, bringing up a slide showing our pipeline. We have the final certification review for the Samsung integration next week, which should clear the way for the partnership expansion we've been discussing. What's the bottom line here? Tom interrupted, speaking for the first time. These numbers are impressive and all, but what's our actual profit margin on the smart home systems versus the traditional components? I paused, surprised not by the question, but by Tom's apparent interest. Our overall margin is 32%, up from 24% this time last year. The smart home division specifically is running at 38%, while components remain at about 22%. Tom nodded, making a note on his phone. And what's industry standard for similar technology? 20 to 25% is considered excellent, Jessica answered, shooting me a look. We're significantly outperforming the sector. Good, Tom said, as if he'd just confirmed something he already knew rather than learning it for the first time. The meeting continued with updates from each department. Throughout, I noticed a subtle shift in dynamics I hadn't anticipated. People were addressing their comments to Tom, seeking his reaction, explaining terms they wouldn't normally define. They were already adapting to the new power structure, positioning themselves favorably with the incoming CEO. Human nature, I supposed. Self-preservation. I couldn't blame them. As the meeting concluded, my father stood. Excellent work, everyone. Samantha, can you walk Thomas through the Samsung certification process this afternoon? He should understand the details before next week's review. Of course, I replied, gathering my materials. Tom, shall we say 2 p.m. in my office? Tom finally looked up from his phone. Actually, I was thinking we could discuss it over. Lunch. The new place on 17th, Valentino's. I've got us a table at noon. Valentino's, the trendy new restaurant with a 3-month waiting list, where tech executives and venture capitalists conducted business over $200 bottles of wine. Of course Tom had a table. That works, I said, though I'd been planning to use lunch to call 2 key development partners and reassure them about the transition. As the room emptied, I felt a presence beside me. Robert Martinez, our head of product development and one of my most valued team members, lingered until we were alone. Got a minute? He asked quietly. I nodded, and we stepped into a small meeting room adjacent to the conference area. Is this really happening? Robert asked once the door closed. Tom as CEO? The guy who asked me last week if we could just use Chinese chips in our security systems because they're cheaper? I appreciated Robert's candor. In an industry dominated by careful corporate speak, his bluntness was refreshing. It's happening. You built this company, Samantha. Everyone knows it. The smart home pivot was your vision when the rest of us, including your father, thought it was too risky. Robert leaned against the wall, arms crossed. I've worked at 8 tech companies in my career. I've never seen a leadership change this illogical. Nepotism rarely follows logic, I said, allowing a hint of bitterness to creep into my voice. What are you going to do? It was the same question Jessica had asked earlier, but coming from Robert, who had contacts throughout the tech world, it carried different implications. Right now, I'm going to ensure a smooth transition, I replied. Beyond that, I'm exploring options. Robert nodded slowly. Just so you know, if those options include starting fresh somewhere else, you wouldn't be going alone. Half the development team would follow you without a second thought. The loyalty warmed me, even as it complicated my calculations. I appreciate that, Robert. Really. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. He tapped the door frame twice as he left. His signature gesture, part superstition and part habit from his days in military intelligence before entering the tech sector. Just putting it out there. We're with you. Whatever comes next. Alone in the meeting room, I allowed myself a moment to absorb the landscape. The company my grandfather had founded in a rented storefront with 2 employees now occupied a prime location in Denver's tech corridor with state-of-the-art facilities. We employed over 180 people, many of whom had been with us for decades. Under my leadership, we'd transformed from a struggling components supplier into a smart home technology innovator. Harrington Electronics wasn't just a company. It was an ecosystem. Families depended on it. Suppliers built their businesses around our orders. The local community benefited from our presence. And now all of that was at risk because my father couldn't see past outdated notions about succession. I checked my watch, 10:45. Time to prepare for lunch with Tom. Whatever his agenda, I needed to be ready. I returned to my office, asking Katie to reschedule my partner calls and pull together the Samsung certification files. As I sat at my desk, my gaze fell on the family photo displayed on my credenza. My grandfather James, my father Richard, Tom, and me at the company's 30th anniversary. My grandfather's arm was around my shoulders, his expression proud as I'd just completed my engineering degree. 3 years after that photo was taken, my grandfather passed away, his last words to me spoken from his hospital bed. "This company will need your mind someday, Sammy. Be ready." I wondered if he'd seen this coming, if he'd known his son would prioritize tradition over talent, gender over merit. Either way, I was making good on my promise to him. I would be ready. And Harrington Electronics, regardless of who sat in the CEO's chair, would remain in the hands of someone who truly understood what my grandfather had built. Valentino's was exactly what I expected. Minimalist decor, panoramic city views, and tables spaced far enough apart to ensure discreet conversations. About mergers and funding rounds? As the maitre d' led me to a corner table, I spotted Tom already seated, 2 glasses of wine poured. "Hope you don't mind," he said, gesturing to the open bottle. "They have a fantastic Barolo. Thought you'd appreciate it." I slid into the seat across from him. "It's a bit early for wine, don't you think?" Tom grinned, the same charming smile that had gotten him out of trouble since childhood. "Come on, Sam. We're celebrating." "Are we? I thought we were discussing the Samsung certification process." "We can do both." He leaned back, studying me. "You know, you always were the serious one, even when we were kids." I didn't respond to the bait. Tom and I had played this game our entire lives, he the carefree charmer, me the responsible one. It had defined our childhood roles just as surely as our genders had now defined our professional fates. The waiter appeared, and Tom ordered for both of us without consulting me. Another power move I chose to ignore. When we were alone again, I placed a folder on the table. The Samsung certification involves 3 stages: technical compatibility, security verification, and system integration. We're in the final. Tom held up a hand. "Before we get into the weeds, can we just talk? Brother to sister?" I paused, then closed the folder. "All right." Tom took a deep breath. "I know yesterday's announcement came as a shock. Dad should have handled it differently." "You think?" The words escaped before I could filter them. "I get why you're upset. You've done amazing things with the company. No one's denying that. And yet here we are." Tom leaned forward. "Look, Sam, you know how Dad is. The Harrington name, the Harrington legacy, it's everything to him. He was always going to choose me eventually." The candid admission stunned me. Not the content. I'd known this truth my entire life, but the fact that Tom would acknowledge it so openly. "So why now?" I asked. "Why not 5 years ago or 5 years from now?" Tom swirled his wine contemplatively. "Honestly, I think he's worried about you." "Worried about me?" I repeated flatly. "You're 38, Sam. No husband, no kids, no life. Outside the company. When was the last time you took a vacation or went on a date?" He held up his hands defensively at my expression. "I'm not judging. I'm telling you what Dad thinks. He believes he's doing you a favor." The absurdity almost made me laugh. Almost. By taking away the company I rebuilt? By forcing me to have a life? By removing the burden? Tom's expression turned unexpectedly earnest. "He sees how much you've sacrificed. He talks about it all the time, how you work harder than anyone, how you never stop. He's afraid you'll burn out with nothing to show for it but a balance sheet." Our food arrived, giving me a moment to process this revelation. Not that it changed anything, but it offered a window into my father's twisted reasoning. In his mind, he wasn't punishing me. He was saving me from myself. "So his solution is to hand the company to you?" I said finally. Someone who until 18 months ago had zero interest in electronics or smart home technology? Tom had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. I know my track record isn't great, but people change, Sam. After Tech Venture collapsed, I did some serious soul-searching. Tech Venture, Tom's latest failed startup, a ride-sharing platform for luxury vehicles that had burned through $2 million in investor capital before spectacularly imploding. I'd reviewed the business plan when he'd first pitched it to our father. It had been fundamentally flawed from conception. And this soul search led you back to Harrington Electronics? I said skeptically. It led me to realize I've been running from my responsibilities, Tom replied. From who I really am, a Harrington. The conversation paused as Tom's phone buzzed. He checked it, typed a quick response, then returned his attention to me. Sorry, Dad checking in. Of course, my father, who had never once texted me during a business lunch, was monitoring this meeting. I shouldn't have been surprised. Tom, I said, deciding to take a different approach, let me ask you something. What do you know about the Samsung certification process? He shrugged. It's some kind of technical verification for our integration with their smart home platform. I nodded slowly. That's a very basic summary. The actual process involves navigating 173 testing protocols across 4 security domains, configuring API access points with specific encryption requirements, and ensuring our devices meet their power consumption standards under 6 different usage scenarios. Tom shifted uncomfortably. That's what we have technical people for. Technical people who need leadership that understands the implications of these standards. The last time we went through certification with a major partner, I spent 2 weeks personally reviewing the security architecture, so I could effectively represent our position during the compliance meetings. I'm a quick study, Tom protested. The certification is next week, I pointed out. He drained his wine glass. Sam, I know what you're doing. You're trying to scare me into backing out. It won't work. I'm trying to make you understand the magnitude of what you're taking on, I countered. This isn't a startup where you can pivot when things get tough. We have contracts worth millions, employees who rely on us for their livelihoods, and partners whose platforms are integrated with our technology. Which is why I need you, Tom said, surprising me again. I'm not stupid, Sam. I know I don't have your technical expertise or experience, but I can learn, and in the meantime, I need you to stay on. Ah, now we were getting to it. The real purpose of this lunch. In what capacity? I asked carefully. Dad mentioned the components division, but I have something else in mind. I want you as my COO. I stared at him. You want me to report to you? Think about it. He leaned forward eagerly. You handle the operational details you excel at, and I focus on the big picture, the strategic vision, the future of Harrington. Electronics. I almost laughed out loud. The strategic vision had been mine all along. The pivot to smart home technology, the software integration, the partnership ecosystem, all my initiatives, executed despite my father's initial resistance. And Jessica? I asked, thinking of our current COO. Tom waved a hand dismissively. We'll find another role for her, something in finance maybe. Just like that, reshuffling executives like playing cards, with no regard for expertise or institutional knowledge. It was exactly the kind of facile decision-making I'd expected. I needed to end this lunch before I said something I couldn't take back. I'll consider it, I lied, closing the folder I'd brought. But right now, I should get back to the office. I have a call with the Samsung team at 2. Tom signaled for the check. I meant what I said, Sam. I want us to work together, to keep Harrington Electronics in the family where it belongs. As he signed the credit card slip, company expense account naturally, I studied my brother. Despite everything, I didn't hate him. Tom had always been exactly what our father raised him to be: entitled, overly confident, and convinced of his own importance despite evidence to the contrary. In many ways, he was as much a victim of our father's outdated values as I was. The difference was those values benefited him. As we walked out of the restaurant, Tom placed a hand on my shoulder. "Think about the COO position. It could be the perfect solution for everyone." I smiled tightly. "I'll let you know my decision soon." Very soon, in fact, because while Tom had been busy enjoying his wine and outlining his grand plans, I'd been mentally finalizing mine. Project Phoenix was about to take flight. Instead of returning to the office after lunch, I directed my driver to take me to the original Harrington Electronics building on the outskirts of town. The old brick structure still housed our research and development department, my choice, as the separation from main operations gave the engineering team freedom to experiment without disrupting production workflows. I found Dr. Margaret Liu, our director of engineering, hunched over a prototype, her silver-streaked black hair pulled into a practical bun. At 58, Margaret had been with the company since my grandfather's days. She was brilliant, uncompromising, and one of the few people who had never underestimated me because of my gender. "Didn't expect to see you here today," she said, straightening up. "Thought you'd be dealing with the fallout from Richard's little bombshell." "That's exactly what I'm doing," I replied. "I need to show you something." I led her to the small office I maintained in the building, little more than a desk and some filing cabinets, but it had served as my thinking space during crucial moments in the company's transformation. I unlocked the bottom drawer of the filing cabinet and pulled out a battered leather portfolio. "Remember this?" I asked, placing it on the desk. Margaret adjusted her glasses. "The smart home security proposal from 2018? When Richard was convinced we'd go under if we didn't slash R&D by 60%. I nodded, opening the portfolio. Inside were the original sketches, circuit designs, and market analyses that had eventually become our flagship product line, the division, that now generated 75% of our revenue. "Do you remember what my father said when I presented this to him?" Margaret snorted. "Circuit boards and power supplies were good enough for my father, and they're good enough for us." Stubborn old fool. The memory still stung even years later. I'd spent months researching smart home technology, identifying market opportunities, calculating costs and potential returns. I'd created a comprehensive 5-year plan for transforming our outdated product lines without laying off a single employee, and my father had dismissed it without even reading past the executive summary. "What he doesn't remember," I said, flipping through the pages, "is what happened next." Margaret's eyes twinkled. "You went rogue." It had been the pivotal moment of my career. Instead of accepting my father's rejection, I'd used my authority as VP of Operations to reallocate resources, creating a skunkworks team to develop the first prototypes. I'd convinced 3 key engineers to work evenings and weekends, promising bonuses from my own salary if we succeeded. I'd leveraged personal connections from MIT to secure our first major tech partnership, a small contract, but enough to prove the concept. 6 months later, I'd presented my father not with a proposal, but with results. A working prototype, a signed partnership agreement, and projected revenue that would save the company from the cost-cutting measures he'd been planning. He'd called it a risky gamble that happened to pay off, I recalled, closing the portfolio. "Never admitted I was right from the beginning." "But he let you run with it," Margaret pointed out. "And look where we are now." Where we were now was a company transformed. The pages in the portfolio told the story. The initial security system development, the expansion into voice control and environmental monitoring, the proprietary software we'd developed, the gradual shift from hardware, supplier to integrated systems provider. Year by year, decision by decision, I'd rebuilt Harrington Electronics from a struggling legacy business into an industry leader. "Remember the Google integration?" I asked, pulling out another file. Margaret groaned. How could I forget? 3. Months of 16-hour days redesigning our API when their specs kept changing. But we delivered. On time, on budget, exceeding their performance requirements, I said, scanning the notes from that period. Because you and your team worked miracles with impossible constraints. Because you were in the trenches with us, Margaret said. You learned enough software engineering to challenge our programmers, enough about network security to navigate the certification process. You weren't just a suit in the corner office. I smiled at her characteristic bluntness. And now my father wants to replace me with exactly that. A suit who doesn't know a circuit board from a motherboard. Margaret removed her glasses, pinching the bridge of her nose. Sam, why are we taking this trip down memory lane? You know I've always backed you, but Richard's made his decision, and from what I hear, Tom's offering you the COO position. News traveled fast. I'm not taking it. Then what? You're leaving? Alarm flashed across her features. Half our tech partners work with us because of their relationship with you. I'm not leaving either, I said, pulling out a final document from the portfolio. A yellowed paper with my grandfather's handwriting. Do you know what this is? Margaret squinted at it. Looks like the original company charter. Not just the charter, the ownership structure when my grandfather incorporated Harrington Electronics. I pointed to a specific paragraph. Read this section. Margaret took the paper, reading carefully. Upon the founder's retirement or death, controlling interest shall be divided equally among all direct descendants who have worked in the business for a minimum of 5 years, regardless of gender. He specifically included regardless of gender in 1978. My grandmother helped start the company, I explained. She didn't get official recognition because of the times, but my grandfather never forgot her contribution. He made sure the charter protected any granddaughters as well as grandsons. Does Richard know about this? I shook my head. The charter was updated when my father took over. He created the current ownership structure with him holding 51%. But he never formally dissolved the original corporation. It still exists as a holding company that owns a significant portion of today's Harrington Electronics. And you're a direct descendant who's worked here more than 5 years, Margaret said, beginning to understand. So according to the original charter, I'm entitled to an equal share of the founding corporation's holdings, I confirmed. I've had the attorneys reviewing it for the past month. They've confirmed it's legally binding. A month. Margaret's eyebrows shot up. You knew this was coming? I sighed, gathering the documents. I suspected. Dad's been bringing Tom to more partnership meetings, introducing him to key suppliers. And last month, he asked me to compile a complete overview of all operations, contracts, and strategic initiatives for the board's review. It wasn't hard to read between the lines. So what now? I carefully returned the portfolio to the filing cabinet. Now I finish what I started. The transformation of Harrington Electronics doesn't end with smart home systems. I've been developing the next phase for over a year. The integrated AI ecosystem, Margaret guessed. We'd discussed it conceptually, moving beyond providing isolated smart home products to creating a comprehensive platform that would learn and adapt to users' habits. A shift that would potentially triple our value proposition. That's part of it. I stood, feeling more centered than I had since yesterday's announcement. I'd like you in the executive meeting tomorrow at 9 a.m. Bring the prototype for the ambient intelligence module. Margaret nodded, though confusion still clouded her features. Sam, you're not telling me everything. No, I agreed, heading for the door. I'm not. But by this time tomorrow, everyone will understand exactly what I've been building all these years, and why no one's going to take it from me. As I walked through the old factory floor, now filled with cutting-edge equipment and engineers, developing the next generation of smart home technology, I felt a sense of clarity I hadn't experienced since that long-ago moment when I decided to go against my father's wishes and pursue the smart home opportunity. Once again, I was at a crossroads. Once again, I was choosing the path that honored not just the Harrington name, but what that name truly stood for: innovation, excellence, and the courage to evolve. Tom might have the family name, he might have my father's blessing, but I had built Harrington Electronics into what it was today, and I was prepared to fight for what I'd built. That evening, I returned to my penthouse earlier than usual, just as the mountains were turning gold in the sunset. I kicked off my heels, a ritual that normally signaled the transition from CEO to simply Samantha. Tonight, though, the boundary between professional and personal felt meaningless. When your family is your business, the two are inextricably linked. I poured myself a glass of the whiskey I'd opened last night, drawn once again to the floor-to-ceiling windows. The city was coming alive below, lights flickering on one by one as dusk settled over Denver. My phone buzzed with a calendar reminder. Mom's birthday dinner, 7:30 p.m. I'd completely forgotten. For a moment, I considered canceling. The thought of sitting across from my father and brother, making polite conversation while pretending yesterday hadn't happened, made my stomach turn. But disappointing my mother on her birthday wasn't an option. She'd been caught in the crossfire of Harrington family dynamics her entire married life. She didn't deserve to have her celebration tainted by our power struggles. I changed into a simple black dress, reapplied my makeup, and headed back out, instructing my driver to stop for flowers on the way. My parents' home, the house I'd grown up in, was a Tudor-style mansion in the city's most exclusive neighborhood, the house my father had purchased when Harrington Electronics had its first million-dollar year. As I walked up the familiar stone path carrying a bouquet of my mother's favorite lilies, I mentally prepared myself. Tonight wasn't about business or succession or my father's betrayal. Tonight was about my mother, Olivia Harrington, who had somehow maintained her grace and kindness despite decades of navigating the challenging personalities of Harrington men. Tom's Tesla was already in the driveway. Of course, he was never late. For family occasions, one of the few responsibilities he took seriously. I rang the doorbell, and my mother opened it herself despite the housekeeper hovering nearby. Samantha, she embraced me, the scent of her signature perfume bringing a rush of childhood memories. At 63, Olivia Harrington remained striking, tall, and slender with silver-streaked dark hair cut into a stylish bob. I wasn't sure you'd come, she said quietly. I wouldn't miss your birthday, I replied, handing her the flowers. Happy birthday, Mom. She accepted them with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Thank you, dear. Come in. Your father and Thomas are already in the dining room. The house looked exactly as it always had, meticulously decorated in traditional style. Family photos arranged precisely on antique tables, nothing out of place. My mother had always treated the house like a stage set, ready for unexpected visitors who might judge our family's success by our surroundings. There she is, my father called as I entered the dining room, his tone jarringly normal, as if yesterday's announcement had never happened. He stood at the head of the table, carving knife in hand, preparing to serve the roast that was our family's traditional celebration meal. Just in time. Tom sat at his right, scrolling through his phone. He glanced up, offering a brief smile. Hey, sis. Thomas, no phones at dinner, my mother chided gently, placing the lilies in a vase the housekeeper had prepared. Samantha, sit here next to me. I took my assigned seat, accepting the glass of wine my father poured. To Olivia, he said, raising his glass. Happy birthday to the woman who's kept us all sane for 40 years. We clinked glasses, the picture of a happy, functional family. Anyone observing would never guess the currents running beneath the surface. Dinner proceeded with carefully neutral conversation, my mother's charity work, a neighbor's renovation project, an upcoming exhibit at the art museum. It wasn't until dessert, my mother's favorite chocolate torte, that Tom broke the unspoken pact to avoid business talk. "So, Sam," he said, setting down his fork, "have you thought any more about my offer?" My mother looked between us, confusion evident. "Offer?" "I've asked Sam to stay on as COO," Tom explained, "working directly with me through the transition and beyond." "Oh," my mother brightened. "That sounds like a wonderful solution, doesn't it, Samantha?" Before I could respond, my father interjected. "It's a generous offer. Most incoming CEOs would clean house entirely." The implication that Tom was doing me a favor by allowing me to keep any role at all hung in the air. I took a slow sip of wine, buying time to control my response. "I'm still considering my options," I said finally. "What options?" My father's voice sharpened. "This is the family company, Samantha. Where else would you go?" It was the opening I'd been waiting for, but I hesitated. Did I really want to have this conversation now during my mother's birthday dinner? My mother reached over, placing her hand on mine. "Perhaps this isn't the best time to discuss business matters." "No, it's all right," I said, squeezing her hand reassuringly before letting go. "Dad's right. Harrington Electronics is the family company, which is exactly why I'm struggling with his decision." My father set down his wine glass with deliberate care. "The decision is made, Samantha." "Based on what criteria?" I asked, keeping my tone even. "Tom has been with the company for 18 months. I've dedicated 6 years to rebuilding it from near bankruptcy to industry leadership." "Sam," Tom began, but I cut him off. "No, let's be honest for once. This isn't about qualifications or results or what's best for the company. This is about gender. If I were your son instead of your daughter, we wouldn't be having this conversation." My father's face flushed. "That's not fair, isn't it? You've never given me a single reason why Tom is better qualified to lead Harrington Electronics, because there isn't one." "It's not about qualifications," my father said, his voice rising. "It's about legacy, about tradition." "Outdated tradition," I countered. "Grandfather wouldn't have made this choice." My father scoffed. "You can't possibly know what my father would have done." "Actually, I do." I reached for my purse, withdrawing a folded copy of the original company charter I'd shown Margaret earlier. "Did you know Grandfather specifically included language ensuring equal treatment of all descendants regardless of gender?" My father stared at the document I slid across the table, recognition dawning in his eyes. "Where did you get this?" "It was in his old files at the R&D building. The original charter makes it clear that he intended for all qualified descendants to have an equal opportunity to lead." My mother intervened, her voice gentle but firm. "Please, can we not do this tonight? It's my birthday." The reminder triggered an immediate wave of guilt. I folded the document, returning it to my purse. "You're right, Mom, I'm sorry." An uncomfortable silence descended on the table, broken only when the housekeeper entered to clear the dessert plates. My mother, ever the gracious hostess, suggested we move to the living room for coffee. As we stood, my father pulled me aside, his voice low. "We'll discuss this tomorrow in my office, 8 a.m. I nodded, then moved to help my mother carry coffee cups. As I arranged them on the living room's silver tray, she touched my arm. "You've sacrificed so much for the company." "Samantha," she said quietly. "Your father doesn't see it, but I do. The missed holidays, the relationships that never had a chance to develop, the personal milestones delayed or forgotten." I swallowed hard. My mother rarely acknowledged the gender dynamics that had shaped our family. "I was proud of my work," I said simply. "I know, and you should be." She adjusted a cup with precision. "But sometimes I wonder if your grandfather would have wanted his company to cost you everything else." Her words struck deeper than she could know. Had I sacrificed too much? The question had haunted my quiet moments for years. The engagement, Broken because I consistently prioritized work emergencies. The friendships that faded when I canceled plans once too often. The perpetually postponed dreams of travel, hobbies, perhaps even children someday. But those had been my choices, made, with clear eyes and full awareness of the consequences. I had wanted to prove myself, to build something meaningful, to earn my place through merit rather than birth. And I had succeeded. Harrington Electronics stood as testament to those sacrifices. The question now was whether I was willing to sacrifice the company itself, to walk away rather than fight for what I'd built. As I carried the coffee tray into the living room, where Tom was showing our father something on his phone and both were laughing, I knew my answer. Some sacrifices were necessary, some were not. And I would no longer sacrifice my future for traditions that had never valued me to begin with. I arrived at Harrington Electronics headquarters at 6:30 a.m. the next morning, well before my scheduled meeting with my father. The building was quiet, with only the security staff and a few early-rising engineers present. I needed this time to prepare, to review documents, and most importantly, to center myself for what promised to be a pivotal confrontation. As I settled at my desk, a notification pinged on my computer, an email from Luxtech Industries, one of our largest smart home partners, marked urgent. I opened it immediately, my heart sinking as I read, "Ms. Harrington, it has come to our attention that Harrington Electronics is undergoing a leadership transition. Given the critical nature of the integration we're developing for our Q4 product launch, we would like to schedule an immediate review meeting to discuss continuity plans and evaluate whether our current agreements require reassessment. Please contact me at your earliest convenience. Regards, Jonathan Maxwell, Chief Technology Officer." This was exactly what I'd feared. News of Tom's appointment had reached our partners, and they were understandably concerned. Luxtech alone represented nearly $8 million in annual contracts. If they pulled out, others would follow. Before I could formulate a response, my phone rang. It was Katie, my assistant, who rarely called this early. "Samantha, I'm sorry to bother you, but I thought you should know there's a situation developing." "What kind of situation?" I asked, already mentally calculating how many more problems I could handle before my 8 a.m. meeting. "Tom is in the prototype lab giving some kind of tour to people I don't recognize. They're taking photos of the ambient intelligence module." I sat up straighter. "He's what? Who authorized that?" "I don't know," Katie said, her voice betraying her anxiety. "Security called me because they couldn't reach you. They said Tom told them it was pre-approved by the executive team." It absolutely was not pre-approved. Our prototype lab contained proprietary technology and equipment that were protected by strict confidentiality agreements. No photography was allowed, and outside visitors required security clearance weeks in advance. "I'll handle it," I said, already heading for the door. "Tell security I'm on my way." The R&D building was located on the other side of the campus, connected to the main offices by a covered walkway. I moved quickly, my mind racing. What was Tom thinking? Who were these people? The possibilities, none of them good, multiplied with each step. I swiped my badge at the security entrance and pushed through the doors to the prototype lab. The facility was impressive, a vast space filled with specialized equipment, testing stations, and climate-controlled chambers for evaluating device performance. Normally, the lab would be buzzing with activity as the day shift began their work. Today, operations appeared to have been temporarily halted. At the far end of the lab, I spotted Tom with 3 men in business suits standing near our newest ambient intelligence module, a piece of technology that had cost over $1.5 million. To develop and used advanced machine learning algorithms we'd spent years perfecting. One of the men was taking photos with a professional camera. "Excuse me," I called out, striding toward them with purpose. "This is a restricted area. Photography is strictly prohibited." Tom turned, surprise quickly morphing into annoyance. "Sam, I didn't expect you in so early. Clearly, I replied, turning to the visitors. Gentlemen, I'm going to have to ask you to stop taking photographs immediately. Security will need to review any images you've already captured. The photographer lowered his camera, looking to Tom for guidance. The oldest man in the group, silver-haired and expensively dressed, stepped forward with an extended hand. Ms. Harrington, I presume. Victor Blackwell, CEO of Ascendant Technologies. Your brother has been giving us an impressive tour of your facilities. Ascendant Technologies, our biggest competitor and a company that had been trying to poach our tech talent for years. I felt a cold weight settle in my stomach as I shook his hand automatically. Mr. Blackwell, this is unexpected. We typically schedule visits from other industry executives well in advance, with appropriate non-disclosure agreements in place. Oh, we've signed the paperwork, he assured me, though his easy smile didn't reach his eyes. Thomas had it all prepared. Very efficient, your brother. I glanced at Tom, who was watching the exchange with an unreadable expression. Would you excuse us for just a moment? Tom, a word, please. I led my brother several yards away, positioning us behind a large testing chamber where we wouldn't be overheard. What the hell are you doing? I demanded in a fierce whisper. Ascendant Technologies, our direct competitor, in our prototype lab, taking photos of proprietary technology? Tom seemed genuinely confused by my anger. It's a potential partnership opportunity. Blackwell reached out yesterday after hearing about my appointment. And you didn't think that was suspicious? That within hours of learning you were taking over, a competitor suddenly wants a tour of our most advanced research facility? They're interested in a joint venture, Tom explained, as if I were being deliberately obtuse. They have distribution channels in markets we haven't penetrated. Because they're our competitors, I hissed. They don't want a partnership, Tom. They want our technology and our client list, which you're handing them on a silver platter. His expression hardened. You don't know that. You're jumping to conclusions because you're angry about the succession announcement. This has nothing to do with succession and everything to do with protecting the company. What NDAs did they sign? Did legal review them? Did you limit what areas they could access? Tom's slight hesitation told me everything I needed to know. Jesus, Tom. They're conducting industrial espionage, and you're giving them a guided tour. You're overreacting, he insisted. Blackwell is a respected industry figure who's been trying to undercut our partnerships for 3 years. I took a deep breath, trying to regain my composure. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to tell them there's been a misunderstanding and the tour needs to end immediately. Security will escort them out and confiscate any photos or notes they've taken. Then you and I are going to have a serious conversation about protocol. You don't give me orders, Sam, Tom said, his voice low. In case you've forgotten, I'm going to be CEO in 3 weeks. And in case you've forgotten, you're currently not the CEO. I am. And I'm telling you this tour ends now, before you compromise our intellectual property and violate about a dozen confidentiality agreements with our actual partners. We stared at each other, neither willing to back down. Finally, Tom shook his head. Fine, have it your way. But you're making a mistake. Blackwell could have been a valuable contact. He's a valuable contact who's currently standing next to our proprietary AI module, probably memorizing its specifications, I pointed out. Now go end this before I call security and have them all removed, including you. As Tom walked back to the visitors, I pulled out my phone and texted Jessica. Emergency meeting in my office, 7:15 a.m., potential security breach in R&D. I watched as Tom spoke to Blackwell, whose affable expression gradually morphed into something cooler and more calculating. The photographer handed over his camera to a security officer who had materialized at my silent signal. This wasn't just an innocent mistake. It was a catastrophic lapse in judgment that could have cost us millions in intellectual property. and it was just the beginning of the complications Tom's appointment would create. By the time I returned to the main building, the email from LuxTech had been joined by 2 more from different partners, all expressing similar concerns about the leadership transition. The situation was escalating faster than I'd anticipated. My carefully constructed plans for a measured response to my father's decision were being overtaken by immediate threats to the company's stability. As I entered my office, where Jessica was already waiting, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I couldn't wait any longer to implement Project Phoenix. The future of Harrington Electronics and everything I'd built depended on it. He did what? Jessica's face registered disbelief as I recounted the scene in the prototype lab. Gave Ascendant Technologies a personal tour of our proprietary R&D facility? Complete with photography, I repeated, pacing my office. The ambient intelligence module, the voice recognition system, everything. Jessica ran a hand through her hair. I don't even have words. Did they see the adaptive learning algorithm? I don't think so. It's still in the secure development area, but they saw enough. I checked my watch. 7:25 a.m. We need damage control immediately. Call legal and have them prepare cease and desist letters regarding any information obtained during the visit. Contact our primary tech partners. Assure them our security protocols remain in place despite this incident. Jessica nodded, making notes. What about your father? Does he know? Not yet. I'm meeting him at 8:00. I stopped pacing, turning to face Jessica directly. It's time for Plan B. Her eyebrows shot up. I thought we were holding that as a last resort. This is a last resort, I said, pulling a USB drive from my desk drawer. Tom's little tour just demonstrated he's not just unqualified. He's actively dangerous to the company's future. We can't wait 3 weeks for the official transition. The emergency response plan we'd created had included several contingencies, from my accepting the COO position under protest to my potential departure from the company. Plan B was the most aggressive option, one I'd hoped to avoid. Are you sure? Jessica asked, her expression serious. Once you do this, there's no going back. Your relationship with your father, with Tom. This isn't about family relationships anymore, I said firmly. It's about protecting Harrington Electronics, the company, the employees, the partners, who depend on us. Tom just invited our biggest competitor to examine proprietary technology that took us years and millions to develop. Jessica nodded slowly. What do you need from me? Have the board packet ready for immediate distribution and tell Margaret to bring the ambient intelligence prototype to the executive conference room at 9 Sauer instead of my office. As Jessica left to execute these tasks, I sat at my desk and opened the original company charter again. My grandfather's vision had been progressive for his time: equal opportunity, regardless of gender, shared governance among qualified family members, protection for the company's long-term interests. Over individual control, my father had systematically dismantled those principles, restructuring the company to consolidate his own power. And now he was prepared to sacrifice everything we'd built on the altar of outdated patriarchal tradition. At 7:55, I gathered my materials and headed to my father's office. His assistant Diane, who had worked for him for over 15 years, gave me a sympathetic smile as I passed. News of the morning's events had clearly spread. He's waiting for you, she said softly. I thanked her and pushed open the heavy oak door. My father sat behind his massive desk, reading glasses perched on his nose as he reviewed some document. Tom sat in one of the visitor chairs, his posture defensive. So this was to be 2 against 1. I shouldn't have been surprised. Samantha, my father said, removing his glasses, I understand there was some confusion this morning regarding visitors to the R&D facility. Confusion? What a convenient euphemism for a massive security breach. If by confusion, You mean that Tom authorized competitors to photograph our proprietary technology without proper clearance or NDAs? Then yes, there was confusion. I remained standing despite the empty chair beside Tom. A confusion that has already resulted in 3 partners contacting me with concerns about our security protocols. My father frowned. Thomas was exploring potential partnership opportunities. That's what leaders do. They build relationships. Leaders also protect intellectual property and honor confidentiality agreements with existing partners, I countered. The visitors this morning were not potential partners. They were competitors who have been actively trying to reverse engineer our products for years. Tom shifted uncomfortably. You're exaggerating the situation. Blackwell was interested in possible collaboration. Blackwell was interested in our AI technology, I cut in. Technology that gives us a competitive advantage worth millions, an advantage you were giving away for free. My father held up a hand. Enough. What's done is done. Security confiscated any photos taken. There was no harm done. No harm. Except for the 3 partners already questioning our reliability. No harm except for the proprietary methods now in the memory of our biggest competitor. But arguing these points would get us nowhere. I didn't come here to debate this morning's security breach. I came to discuss the succession plan. My father leaned back in his chair. As I told you last night, the decision is final. Thomas will become CEO at the end of the month. You've been offered the COO position, which is more than generous considering the circumstances. What circumstances would those be? I asked, my voice dangerously calm. The circumstances of a family business, my father replied, as if explaining to a child. Harrington Electronics has always passed from father to son. That's our tradition. A tradition that contradicts the company's founding principles, I said, placing the copy of the original charter on his desk. As I mentioned last night, grandfather specifically ensured equal opportunity for all his descendants, regardless of gender. My father barely glanced at the document. That charter was superseded when I reorganized the company in 2005. The current corporate structure gives me controlling interest and the authority to name my successor. The reorganization created a new operating entity, I agreed. But the original corporation still exists as a holding company that owns 27% of Harrington Electronics. And according to its charter, I'm entitled to equal control of that holding company. For the first time, I saw uncertainty flicker across my father's face. What are you suggesting? I'm not suggesting anything. I'm stating facts. As a direct descendant who has worked in the business for more than 5 years, I have equal right to the founding shares. Shares that were never properly distributed according to the charter's succession plan. Tom leaned forward. What does this have to do with anything? Dad owns 51% of the company. He can appoint whoever he wants as CEO. Dad owns 51% of the operating company, I corrected. But the holding company that controls 27% of those shares has its own governance rules. Rules that were never formally changed. Rules that give me equal say in how those shares are voted. My father's expression darkened as he began to understand the implications. You're threatening a legal challenge over control of the holding company. I'm not threatening anything, I said evenly. I've already filed the paperwork. My attorneys submitted it yesterday afternoon. The silence that followed was absolute. My father stared at me as if seeing me for the first time, not as his daughter, not as his temporary stand-in, but as an opponent he had severely underestimated. You would sue your own family? Tom asked, incredulous. I'm protecting the company. Our grandfather built, I replied, not taking my eyes off my father. A company that today faces 3 partner concerns, 1 security breach, and the prospect of a CEO who doesn't understand the most basic principles of our industry, all before 8 a.m. My father stood slowly, his hands flat on the desk. This is a mistake, Samantha. Even if you have some technical legal claim, which I doubt, Fighting this in court would damage the company far more than any transition issues. I agree, I said, surprising them both. Which is why I've prepared an alternative solution. I reached into my portfolio and withdrew a second document, a new corporate structure that honored my grandfather's original intent while addressing our current reality. I placed the proposal on the desk beside the charter. The board meets in 1 hour. I'll be presenting this restructuring plan for their approval. I wanted to give you the courtesy of seeing it first. As my father picked up the document, his face transitioning from shock to anger, I turned to leave. At the door, I paused. One final thing. I've scheduled an all-hands meeting for 11 hour. I'll be addressing the company about our path forward. I hope you'll both be there. Without waiting for a response, I walked out, closing the door firmly behind me. In the outer office, Diane looked up, concern evident in her expression. Everything all right, Ms. Harrington? I smiled, feeling lighter than I had in days. Everything is exactly as it should be, Diane. Change is coming to Harrington Electronics, just not the change my father anticipated. I had approximately 45 minutes before the board meeting, not enough time to second-guess my decision. Thankfully, as I walked back to my office, I felt strangely calm. The die was cast. After 6 years of respecting my father's authority, of working within his constraints, of proving myself over and over only to be dismissed, I had finally taken matters into my own hands. Jessica was waiting in my office along with Margaret and Robert, my core team, the people who had been instrumental in Harrington Electronics' transformation. How did it go? Jessica asked, rising from her chair. About as expected, I replied, setting my portfolio on the desk. Shock, then anger, then threats about damaging the company. I left them with the restructuring proposal. Margaret snorted. Richard never could handle being outmaneuvered. What's your read? Will he fight it? I considered the question as I took my seat. He'll try, but the legal foundation is solid. And more importantly, we have the business case on our side. 3 partner concerns this morning alone, plus the security breach. The board can't ignore those. Robert leaned forward. The engineering team is behind you. We had an informal meeting after word spread about the Ascendant Technologies visit. No one wants to work for a CEO who doesn't understand basic IP protection. I nodded, grateful for the support but aware of the complexities still ahead. This isn't going to be clean or easy. We're challenging not just my father's decision, but his entire worldview. He genuinely believes the company should pass to his son, regardless of qualifications. And Tom? Jessica asked. Where does he stand in all this? It was a good question. Despite everything, I didn't believe Tom was malicious, just entitled and woefully unprepared. Tom is following the path that was laid out for him. He's never had to fight for anything, never had to prove himself. Why would he question a system designed for his benefit? I glanced at my watch. 8:25. Margaret, is the ambient intelligence prototype ready for the demonstration? She nodded. Set up in the conference room. It's impressive, Sam. The board will understand immediately why it's a game changer. Good, because we're not just fighting for control today. We're fighting for the future direction of Harrington Electronics. I took a deep breath. The smart home division was only phase 1. The integrated AI ecosystem is where the real growth potential lies. We're ready to evolve from device manufacturer to platform provider. It was the vision I'd been developing for the past 18 months, a comprehensive strategy to triple our value and secure our position at the forefront of the industry. A vision that required deep understanding of AI engineering, cybersecurity protocols, and partner ecosystems. A vision Tom could never execute. The board packet has been distributed, Jessica confirmed. Financial projections, market analysis, partner testimonials. Everything to support both the restructuring and the strategic pivot. I nodded, feeling a moment of gratitude for these allies who understood what was at stake. Then I think we're as ready as we'll ever be. Let's head to the conference room. As we gathered our materials, my phone buzzed. A text from my mother. "Your father just called. What's happening, Samantha?" I hesitated, then typed a quick response. "Protecting grandfather's legacy. I'll explain everything later." We walked to the executive conference room where Margaret's team had set up the ambient intelligence system prototype, a revolutionary design that would allow smart home users to interact with their environment in entirely new ways, creating personalized experiences that adapted to individual preferences while maintaining strict privacy controls. The board members were already arriving, 8 people, mostly old family friends or business associates of my father. People who had known me since childhood, who had watched me grow up, graduate, and eventually take the reins of the company. Would that personal connection help or hurt my case today? Before I could dwell on the question, the door opened and my father strode in, Tom trailing behind him. The tension in the room immediately ratcheted up several notches. My father's face was a mask of controlled anger, his posture rigid as he took his seat at the head of the table. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began without preamble, "I've called this emergency meeting to address a situation that has developed. My daughter Samantha has initiated legal action regarding the holding company that owns a portion of Harrington Electronics shares." Several board members exchanged confused glances. This was not how I had planned to begin the meeting, but I should have expected my father to try seizing control of the narrative. "That's correct," I said, keeping my voice level, though I would characterize it not as legal action, but as a formal recognition of the original company charter's provisions regarding succession and share distribution. I passed copies of the charter to each board member. As you can see, the founding document of Harrington Electronics, drafted by my grandfather James Harrington, specifically ensures equal treatment of all direct descendants who have worked in the business for 5 years or more, regardless of gender. "This is a technicality," my father interjected. "The company was reorganized in 2005. "The operating entity was reorganized," I corrected, "but the holding company that controls 27% of our shares maintains its original charter, a charter that entitled me to equal control of those shares upon meeting the 5-year employment requirement, a milestone I passed 3 years ago." I could see the board members processing this information, some with surprise, others with growing understanding. Lawrence Porter, the longest-serving board member and a contemporary of my grandfather, spoke first. "Richard, is this accurate? The original charter was never formally superseded for the holding company?" My father's hesitation spoke volumes. There may be some administrative oversights in how the transition was documented, but the intent was clear. The company passes to my son. "Intent doesn't override legal documents," said Diane Ellison, one of the 2 female board members and a former corporate attorney. "If the charter specified equal treatment regardless of gender, and that provision was never formally amended, Samantha has a legitimate claim." "This isn't just about legal technicalities," I said, bringing the focus back to the core issue. "It's about what's best for Harrington Electronics. This morning alone, 3 major technology partners have contacted me with concerns about the announced leadership transition, and we experienced a serious security breach when unauthorized. Visitors were allowed to photograph proprietary technology. Several board members straightened in their chairs, alarmed. "What security breach?" Porter demanded. Before my father could intervene, I outlined the Ascendant Technologies incident in clinical detail. I didn't name Tom directly, but there was no need. Everyone in the room understood who had authorized the visit. "This is exactly why leadership requires more than a family name," I continued. "It requires experience, industry knowledge, and an understanding of our business fundamentals. Qualities I've demonstrated over 6 years of successful leadership." I gestured to the prototype at the side of the room. "But this meeting isn't..." just about who sits in the CEO's office. It's about where Harrington Electronics goes next. I'd like to present our new ambient intelligence system and the integrated ecosystem it represents, the next phase in our company's evolution. As Margaret stepped forward to begin the demonstration, I caught my father's eye across the table. Beneath his anger, I recognized something else, a grudging respect perhaps, or at least the recognition that he had underestimated me for the last time. The battle for Harrington Electronics had begun in earnest, and I intended to win. Margaret's demonstration of the ambient intelligence system was flawless. As she explained the technical innovations and market applications, I watched the board members' expressions shift from polite interest to genuine engagement. Even my father leaned forward when she highlighted the potential revenue projections, a 45% increase in our smart home division's profitability within 12 months. The key advantage, Margaret concluded, is that this isn't just a better product. It's a comprehensive ecosystem that integrates with our partners' platforms at a much deeper level. We become essential to their strategy, not just another device manufacturer. And we've already secured provisional patents on 5 aspects of the design, I added, creating a significant competitive moat that will be difficult for companies like Ascendant to overcome. The mention of Ascendant brought the conversation back to the morning's security breach. Lawrence Porter turned to my father. "Richard, this situation is concerning. How do you respond to Samantha's points about partner concerns and security protocols?" My father cleared his throat. "Today's incident was unfortunate but contained. As for partner concerns, they're natural during any leadership transition. Thomas is more than capable of addressing them." "I'd like to speak to that," Tom interjected, surprising me. He had been unusually quiet throughout the meeting. "I acknowledge that I made a mistake this morning. I was eager to explore potential partnerships and moved too quickly without following established protocols. It was an unexpectedly mature admission." Tom continued, "However, I believe this demonstrates precisely why Samantha's proposed restructuring makes sense. Her expertise with our technology and partner relationships complements my external business development skills. Together, we could lead Harrington Electronics more effectively than either of us alone." I blinked, caught off guard by this apparent pivot. Was Tom actually supporting my proposal? I glanced at the document in front of the board members, the restructuring plan I'd developed as my Plan B. The proposal outlined a dual leadership structure, myself as CEO and President of Technology and Partnerships, our core business, with Tom as President of Business Development and New Ventures, a newly created division focused on expanding our market presence. Both roles would report to a newly established executive chair position, which I had left unnamed in the document. My father, who had clearly read the proposal during the demonstration, finally spoke. This arrangement would divide the company. Harrington Electronics has always had clear, singular leadership. Actually, Lawrence Porter interjected, James ran the company with a partnership model in its early days. He and Michael Donovan effectively served as co-leaders, with James handling technology and Michael managing business development. It was quite effective. This historical perspective seemed to catch my father off guard. He had always presented his father as a singular autocratic leader, a narrative that justified his own leadership style. Diane Ellison tapped the restructuring proposal. "I see potential here. The technology division requires deep technical knowledge and established partner relationships, Samantha's strengths. The business development role leverages different skills, networking, relationship building, market expansion, which align with Thomas's background." Other board members began to nod, warming to the concept. The dual leadership structure addressed multiple concerns simultaneously. It respected the family succession tradition while acknowledging merit and expertise. It maintained continuity with technology partners while creating growth opportunities. It offered a compromise that could avoid potentially damaging legal battles. My father, sensing the shift in the room, attempted to regain control. If the board is considering this approach, there would need to be a clear hierarchy. As executive chair, I would have final authority over major decisions. And there it was, his counter move. Accept the restructuring, but position himself above both Tom and me, maintaining ultimate control. The executive chair role requires board approval and would have clearly defined parameters, I noted. It's a governance position, not an operational one, ensuring the company's long-term strategic direction while allowing the respective presidents to manage their divisions. The discussion continued for another hour, delving into the specifics of the restructuring. Throughout, I maintained my composure, addressing each concern with fact-based responses, referring to performance metrics and partner feedback rather than emotions or personal claims. Finally, Lawrence Porter called for a preliminary vote to determine whether the board supported the restructuring concept in principle, with details to be finalized in a subsequent meeting. Those in favor of exploring the dual leadership structure as outlined in Samantha's proposal, with appropriate governance mechanisms to be determined. 7 hands raised, a clear majority. My father's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Then, I believe we have a path forward, Porter concluded. Richard, Samantha, Thomas, I suggest the 3 of you develop a detailed transition plan for board review next week. In the meantime, Samantha will continue as CEO with all current authorities intact. As the meeting adjourned, board members filed out, many stopping to examine the ambient intelligence prototype more closely. My father remained seated, staring at the restructuring document. "You've been planning this for some time," he said when we were alone, his voice oddly quiet. "I've been preparing for contingencies," I corrected. "After 6 years in business, I've learned that hope is not a strategy." He looked up, and for a brief moment I glimpsed something like pride in his expression before it vanished behind his usual reserve. "You're more like my father than I realized." It was perhaps the closest thing to a compliment he had ever given me. Before I could respond, Tom approached, his expression unreadable. "Smart proposal," he said, nodding toward the document. "You could have pushed for complete control, but you created a role for me." "The company needs both sets of skills," I replied carefully. "And despite everything, we're still family." Tom studied me for a moment. "You really believe I could contribute something valuable, don't you?" "I believe you have potential you've never fully explored," I said honestly. "The question is whether you're willing to earn your place rather than expecting it as a birthright." He seemed to consider this, then extended his hand. "I guess we'll find out. Partners." I hesitated only briefly before shaking his hand. "We'll see." As they left the conference room, Jessica approached from where she'd been waiting by the door. "That went better than expected. Your father didn't explode. Tom actually supported the concept, and the board backed you overwhelmingly. It's just the beginning," I cautioned. "My father won't relinquish control easily, and Tom's sudden cooperation seems convenient." "You don't trust either of them?" Jessica noted. It wasn't a question. "I trust that my father will always do what he believes is best for the Harrington legacy," I replied. "And I trust that Tom will always look out for Tom. Neither of those priorities necessarily aligns with what's best for the company." I gathered my notes and headed for the door. Have legal start drafting the formal executive chair parameters, strict limitations on operational interference, clear division of authorities, and schedule the all-hands meeting as planned. It's time everyone understands where Harrington Electronics is headed. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.